Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. This is our 100th episode, so thank you for tuning in for the last 100 episodes. If you've been here since the beginning, that's awesome. If you came somewhere along the way, like most of you, then thank you for your support, as always. And I want to invite you all, if you haven't already, to subscribe, to leave a comment, to like, and share with your friends. And there's no video today. Sorry about that. I was not able to make that happen. So I don't have anything special planned this episode. I don't have a montage of the last 100 episodes or anything like that. It's just you and me doing what we've done every week for the last 20 months. So on Saturday, we learned that the Trump administration had captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, which I believe is a stunning achievement considering there were a few war hawks over the last few weeks murmuring about a potential to invade the country. And if we did that, that would have been very difficult. However, they captured him, and it seems unclear how they did it. It's definitely top secret information. The administration reported that they've been planning this since the middle of December, and I suspect that they've been planning this for the last few months. It started with the attacks on drug boats, which began in August, and then it seemed to escalate every week from there. I'm going to discuss what happened, the reaction, and what is expected to happen in Venezuela. Before I go on, if you're interested in the history of Venezuela, more specifically the political history, I did that in an episode a couple of months ago, so please check that out. It's become very relevant recently in ways that I did not plan. So, as I already mentioned, Maduro was captured. He's been charged in New York with many crimes, including counts of narco-terrorism, conspiracy to import cocaine, and possession of machine guns, drug trafficking, and more, which would probably send him to prison for the rest of his life. Thankfully, there were only a few injuries, but no Americans died in the mission. No American equipment were lost either, which is pretty impressive considering what happened under the Biden administration with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. We lost 13 Americans and over $100 billion in equipment. And however, the big controversy is that the Trump administration did not receive congressional authorization. On the ground, Venezuela declared a national emergency, denouncing this as an extremely serious military aggression. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez is now the acting president of Venezuela, as Maduro did when Chavez died 13 years ago. Then there is going to be an election within the next few months if the president has been determined to be permanently absent, and I think it's safe to say he's not going to be going back to Venezuela. Will this election be free and fair? Probably not. Maduro didn't really groom any successors, so it remains unclear if the new president will have the same power that Maduro did. Usually, though, in my experiences, countries don't become democracies unless the leadership of that country lets it happen. So if Maduro had stepped aside and said, okay, I'm off, you can form a democracy, then that probably would have been best. People forget, as little as 20 years ago, Venezuela was a democracy. So they are not like Russia. They have an experience with democracy before, and I think the country has a good chance of the potential to return to one, considering the opposition has remained alive, even if suppressed. Economic conditions on the ground might be enough to force a change, but that remains unclear. Rodriguez, if she refuses to cooperate with the administration, Trump has said that she will pay a very big price, probably bigger than Maduro. Meanwhile, the opposition in Venezuela wrote a statement saying, given his refusal to accept a negotiated exit, the government of the United States has fulfilled its promise to enforce the law. We have struggled for years and we have given it our all, and it has been worth it. What had to happen is happening. She also called for Edmundo Gonzalez, who the U.S. has called president-elect of Venezuela, to take office immediately. The international reaction, more so from the U.S. adversaries, has been scathing. Russia and China condemned it, which isn't a shock. What was funny was that Russia said the people of Venezuela have the right to determine their own future, which is ironic because Russia clearly doesn't believe that about the people of Ukraine. China has said that wars cause instability, which is ironic because they are plotting an invasion of Taiwan as we speak, and have supported Russia's war in Ukraine. So don't take them too seriously. And then Lula in Brazil, Pedro Gustave in Colombia, the outgoing president of Chile, Gabriel Boric, and other left-wing leaders have condemned it. Meanwhile, right-wing leaders like Javier Milei, the Ecuadorian president Gabriel Noboa, have celebrated it, and I haven't heard anything from Nayib Bukele, but I imagine he's quite pleased. Meanwhile, U.S. allies are none too pleased either. The French foreign minister said international law was violated. The Canadian foreign minister said that they call on all parties to respect international law and that they stand by the people of Venezuela and their desire to live in a peaceful and democratic society. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said, nothing definitive. Neither did the Canadian Prime Minister. Ukraine seemed to support the move. Meloni in Italy seemed to support it as well. And then there's some others as well that didn't support the strike but didn't seem too angry about it either. So what are my thoughts? Well, many of you know that I am a very isolationist person. However, I did support the removal of Maduro for certain reasons. The first reason was the drugs. The administration has been correct that drugs have been an issue. They have come from other countries, but Venezuela has been one of the issues. Second, unlike Iraq and Afghanistan, Venezuela is a real country, and most of the citizens of the country were against the regime. And many of them have unfortunately left. Well, I guess it's good for them. They left the country, which does make me think a civil war is a possibility. I still think the chance is quite low. There was a civil war in Libya when we overthrew Gaddafi 15 years ago. However, considering Maduro was defeated in a landslide in 2024, it makes me think that Maduro has little support among the grassroots. Also, we do not have any ground forces, and hopefully it stays that way, and Venezuela has little capacity to attack the mainland United States. Additionally, Maduro has been a violent regime for years and did not deserve to remain in power. If we had invaded the country, I would have been pissed, but since it was in and out, I'll support it. I think, however, we need to let the people of Venezuela determine their own future. We can't go back to the Cold War era days where we prop up a dictatorship for political purposes. We should be supporting Venezuela in its transition to democracy in the early stages, and then we should be letting them run the show. Trump, in a press conference on Saturday, said that we're going to run Venezuela under a peaceful transition. Whatever that means remains unclear. Marco Rubio has said he insisted that the country is going to be run by the Venezuelans, but instead we're going to coerce them. And we're also going to continue to do a military quarantine of the country to capture their oil exports. And I did watch the press conference that President Trump gave on Saturday morning, and usually I don't watch these things, there's really no need to, and it didn't really provide any new information, except that he didn't rule out putting troops on the ground. In fact, he seemed to suggest it, and he also talked quite a bit about oil, and if you follow Trump for any length of time, he cares about two things: immigration and oil. Those are his big two things, and they're important, don't get me wrong, but they're definitely not the only things. Insisted that it would be oil companies that would be rebuilding Venezuela's oil industry and not the United States, which is hard to believe, but he also said that the people of Venezuela would benefit from it. I imagine that they would be quite skeptical of that, considering what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan and then in Libya. If I were them, I would be very concerned. I guess in the case of Afghanistan, it was going well until we left. But one of the big mistakes we've learned about the conflicts of the 21st century is, which by the way is now a quarter of the way through, isn't that crazy? The things that we've learned is that when you invade a country and expect them to rise up and support you, it often isn't that easy. People don't like to be ruled over, but they definitely don't like to be ruled over by foreigners. So what about the congressional authorization? Well, I think the administration was right to ignore Congress on this one. Not because I support ignoring Congress or because these operations need to be done quick and without fanfare, which is what this one was done. I thought that was done quite well, as I've said before. Congress is on recess at the moment. This was done quick and easy, and they couldn't have been consulted even if they wanted to. And I definitely think they should be offered briefings, and according to top Democrats, they have not been given a briefing yet. But the administration, I believe, did the right thing. So what should Democrats do? Well, I think they could take two different paths. They could support the administration in part and say they wish that they've been consulted, they're happy Maduro is gone, but they want peace in the country and no more war. Or they can claim that Trump is a threat to democracy and this is yet another sign. I hope they do the first. I think they're going to do the latter. Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are the two Democratic leaders in Congress, and they've harped on the fact that Trump did not get congressional approval. But Trump said in a press conference this weekend, as I said, he's totally right about this. Congress tends to leak, which is absolutely true. Not only that, but if they were insane enough to put this up for a vote for the world to see before we captured Maduro, Republicans control Congress, so they would have approved it. Hakeem Jeffries has dodged questions about whether capturing Maduro was right, only saying that there was no congressional authorization. And Chuck Schumer, on the other hand, seemed to condemn it a bit more, and he said he expects a vote in the Senate this week on blocking further action in Venezuela. The strange thing is, remember, he's not in charge of the Senate anymore. He's not the majority leader. That's up to the Republican leader, John Thune. For what it's worth now, Gavin Newsom, the front runner to be the nominee in 2028, has not said anything, which is typical of a governor. Whenever he does announce he is running, because he is absolutely going to run, probably in about a year, he's going to have to answer questions about this. Lastly, as a small d Democrat, I believe that people should govern themselves. The people of Venezuela, as I believe of every country on earth, should have the right to govern itself. And while the operation to catch Maduro was successful, it remains to be seen if the liberation of Venezuela will be a success in and of itself. So let's move on. This is what we were going to talk about if the capture hadn't happened yet. Let's talk about the peace talks in Ukraine and where that might be going. This was going to be all I talked about until the news broke, as I said. So here we are. Not much else is happening beside that. Congress is still in recess until tomorrow, or I guess today, as when you're listening to this on Monday, January 5th. That's when Congress is coming back. There's not too much that they have on the docket, so here's where we are. I'll just start with what I believe here before we go into the facts, which I usually do it the other way around, but that's where we are. That's where we are. If I believe that Russia and Putin do not actually want peace, I think that's pretty obvious. If they really wanted peace, they could make it happen. The only way Putin will make peace is if he's forced either militarily or economically. So what's the situation on the ground in Ukraine? As of now, Russia holds the same territory it held 3 years ago in early 2023. They've made a few gains in southeastern Ukraine, but they have not taken any of the land they claimed. They've made a few gains in southeastern Ukraine, but they still have not taken all of the land they claimed to have annexed in 2022. For now, Ukraine holds strong fortresses in the eastern portion of the country, which Russia is demanding before they hand over any peace talks. Problem is, once those are gone, those are handed over, there will be nothing from stopping Russia from attacking the rest of eastern Ukraine. Meanwhile, President Macron in France has informed the world that Kiev's allies will meet in Paris next month by next month, that'd be actually this month, in January, to decide what is next. It's important to remember while America has been providing military support, our allies in Europe have been keeping the government running via economic support. The Canadians offered $2.5 billion a couple of days ago, although not to be rude to the Canadians, they don't really have that much to give, either economically or militarily. Russia has also deployed its nuclear weapons to Belarus, which is an ally of Russia, and they're not really just an ally of Russia. Belarus is kind of like a puppet of Russia. It's hard to explain. According to Russian media, which is not the strongest source, but it's what we got, they can reach 3,400 miles away. They can strike Warsaw, Poland within 11 minutes, and the NATO headquarters in Brussels within 17. And before we all panic, I think this is once again a show of force. There's something called mutually assured destruction, which provides a large incentive for one party not to attack the other first, and that's if Russia strikes a NATO country with a nuclear weapon. Not only will that country respond, but all of NATO will respond and strike with their own nuclear weapons, destroying Europe, Russia, and probably the United States. It's a situation where all sides would lose, therefore there's no interest in anyone start the war, hence why we haven't had one. Then you have China, and I think this is really interesting because they were doing some military exercises around the island of Taiwan, which is a breakaway part of China that China wants to have control over. We don't really have time to get into that aspect of it, but I will remind everyone that China has been an ally of Russia, not explicitly, but more implicitly, except when Russia talks about nuclear weapons. China is a business country. They want to sell things to the world. Talk of nuclear winter from a nuclear war has not been conducive to business, so they have been against it. So if anything, this could help drive a wedge between Russia and China, the talk of nuclear weapons. The goal is to scare the people of Europe into thinking that Russia is going to escalate the war, which Russia will not. I also want to zoom out here. I've said before on the show that we are already at war with Russia. It's a hybrid war or a proxy war. One sign of war's ending is when an economy takes the hit. And believe it or not, despite what some on the left have said, the U.S. economy remains somewhat strong. GDP growth in the third quarter was much higher than expected, and inflation remains just above target. However, the Canadian and European economies are flirting with recession. France has political instability. Spain has had political deadlock. The British are also suffering from a spending squeeze, and the Germans are also very borrowing averse, and they are already running large deficits. As for the other countries like Poland, Finland, Sweden, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, and Greece, they are already spending a lot of their money on defense, some of them over 4% of GDP. And that really doesn't leave many other countries other than like Austria and Luxembourg, and they're not contributing much. So there's really no extra capacity to ramp up defense spending without massive borrowing, which European countries are already struggling from because they have high debt levels already. And then we do too. What about Russia? Well, their economy is also not doing so hot. Why? Because Russia gets most of their money from oil. And if you haven't noticed already, gas and oil prices are actually quite low. Now, they're not as low as they were a couple of years ago, like before COVID, but they're very low compared to where they were in 2022. Russia has already had to sell its oil at a discount because of sanctions. And considering that oil's hovering around $60 a barrel, they're more likely selling it for 45 or 50, maybe even lower. And the Indians have said they're not going to buy anymore. The Chinese are still buying, but Russia might run out of money, and they're not really getting a lot of credit. Even if if they do, that wouldn't be a big deal because their debt levels are low. But they're not really getting a lot of credit because of sanctions. And we've been told the last 4 years, I'm not going to be one of those people that says the Russian economy is on the verge of collapse. I don't think that's true. I don't think what you'll see is a massive 1929 style economic collapse. I think what's more likely is, and I'm not a defense expert, then gradually run out of military supplies. And there's been some evidence of that already. But they could go on for many more years. That's what I've also heard from defense experts. And I don't think this is imminent. As I said, I don't think we're going to see next week or next month. It's going to be many more years. I think Russia could battle on. I really think it's a matter of like how long can Ukraine hold on. And I think Putin will take this as long as he physically can. In his New Year's address, he vowed to complete the special missions of the military operation, which is his code for the war in Ukraine. He also said that it was a fight for the nation's survival and that we believe in you and our victory. That's what he said. So let's pause here and marvel at the moment before we get all too pessimistic, because while I am isolationist and I don't want to support Ukraine, I believe if we are going to get involved, we might as well support Ukraine rather than do what we're doing now. But I think what's really marvelous is that Ukraine was predicted to collapse just 4 years ago. They said Kiev would fall in 3 days and the rest of the country in less than 90. It's been 47 months and Ukraine still stands. And that's remarkable, no matter what happens. So what's happening with these negotiations? Well, the short answer is we really don't know. The two big sticking points are territory and a security guarantee. The security guarantee, that seems to be going well. The territory, not so much. Trump and Zelensky met at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, and it came out that the U.S. offered a 15-year agreement. And Zelensky said the U.S. and Ukraine security guarantee was 100% agreed to. So now that means it was agreed to between them, not so much between Ukraine and Russia. And Ukraine wanted a 50-year security guarantee, not just a 15. So that is a concession. And this means that we would be supporting Ukraine's security. We would be guaranteeing their security for 15 years, which, of course, I'm absolutely opposed to. That would be keeping us locked in Ukraine until 2041. And I've explained that before. That's why I'm not going to get into that here. I would say this, though. Considering we have military bases all over Europe and indeed all over the world, that this would open the door to help establishing U.S. military bases in Ukraine that are U.S. held. And as I'll get in a moment, whether or not Putin will accept that, I think the answer is basically a no. We don't know for sure, but I can't imagine he would. Zelensky also said that the U.S., Europe, Ukraine security agreement is almost agreed to, and then the Maduro stuff kind of threw a spanner in the works. We're not quite sure what the progress on that is. This was earlier in the week. It remains a sticking point if NATO forces will be on the ground in Ukraine. I'm thinking if we are going to provide a security guarantee, we would need to have military bases in Ukraine. I haven't heard much about that. That would make sense to me. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but that would make sense if that's what we ended up doing. So then in a convenient twist, late last week, before Maduro was captured, Russia alleged that Ukraine was trying to attack Putin's residence, and there's no evidence for this. There's satellite imagery. I have a strong feeling our national intelligence team knows more about this, and obviously that's classified information. They probably can confirm or deny, but there's no evidence for this. It's probably not true. And if a strike did happen, we would know about it because there'd be satellite imagery. But since there is no damage reported, then we don't know. The Kremlin is calling this a terrorist attack. It comes after Kiev was attacked multiple times, and it seems to be that Putin is trying to distract or delay from negotiations. And I believe ultimately what is going to happen is that Trump is going to drag Ukraine over to Russia. And then there's going to be something that Trump wants. Ukraine agrees to, either reluctantly or willingly. And Putin does not accept it, whatever that is. And then Putin walks away. And then what happens after that remains unclear. What does Trump do next? Trump could walk away from Ukraine, which is what I would do if I was him, or Trump could back Ukraine to the hilt. But if that's what we do, then we're basically going back to the Biden era policy, which also did not work. So this week, leaders of Europe are supposed to meet in Paris, and then with U.S. negotiators, and then we'll see what happens next. And there's supposed to be a summit here in the U.S. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be trilateral, but I imagine Zelensky will be back in the U.S. more than once. What I have not seen, either from the media or from politicians, and this seems to be little-known clause in the Lisbon Treaty, which was authorized in the late 2000s, or Article 42.7 says if a member state has been the victim of an armed aggression on another territory, by the way, the Lisbon Treaty is the Treaty of the European Union, so this would be for European Union members. If a member has been a victim of an armed aggression on its territory, the other member states shall have towards an obligation of aid and assistance by all other members in power with accordance of the Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. It also states that commitments and cooperation in this area shall be consistent with commitments under NATO. So what does that mean? Well, it means that Ukraine is considering joining the EU. We know that. So that would probably be at least 10 years away, maybe more like 15 or 20. Turkey's been trying to join the EU for the last 25 years. It still hasn't happened for various reasons. So the problem here, it seems like Russia is okay with with Ukraine joining the EU. They haven't opposed it. They might, I would think Putin would be, but you never know. And if that did happen, what does assistance mean? Does assistance mean economic, or does it mean any kind of assistance? And if it's any kind, does that include military assistance? So joining EU could be considered a form of a security guarantee, although it's ambiguous. Then again, ambiguous might be good because there's something called strategic ambiguity, which is the use of vague language to kind of keep things flexible, to make the enemy question what you're going to do. It allows a commitment without actually making a commitment. It's the policy we have in Taiwan. Nobody really knows what's going to happen if China invades Taiwan. Are we going to back Taiwan or not? It seems like we would, but the strategic ambiguity makes that unclear. So maybe the same thing could happen here. And I also think it's interesting, Mike Pompeo, Trump's former Secretary of State, said Putin has conceded literally nothing, and Pompeo is right. He said, the adversary here, Vladimir Putin, has, to the best I can tell, conceded literally nothing to date, and while they say there's 90% agreement, I doubt Vladimir Putin thinks that the remaining 10% that remains is anything that he's willing to give up on. This is about land. He also doesn't want European forces on his border. That's a part of a security guarantee. I'll bet that's a poison pill for him. And Secretary Pompeo is absolutely right. This is the whole reason the war started 4 years ago. Putin was concerned about European forces on his doorstep. And I'm not defending Putin or saying he was right to go on the offensive, but that's his reasoning. And the only way he would give that up is if he got his demand. And the only way he would give up in Ukraine, which would mean the end of Ukraine as we know it. And I already talked about Russia and how they might be acting here, or how they might be forced to the table. I think Ukraine is desperate for military and economic aid, and it's not just me thinking this. Plenty of others do, and it makes logical sense. They're conceding basically everything they can, and I wouldn't be surprised if eventually they make a territorial concession as well. And that would require a vote in Ukraine's parliament, which would be tricky, but it is theoretically possible. Their hope is probably that Trump will make a deal. As I said earlier, Putin will go against it, and then Trump will turn on Putin and give more weapons to Ukraine. And that's probably their hope. Whether or not that happens, I don't know. That is up to speculation at this point. So that is all for this episode. It's a little bit longer than usual. Thank you for sticking with me. Next week, we're actually going to talk about successes and failures of the first year of the Trump administration, so please come back for that. Thank you for your support, as always, over the last 100 episodes, and I appreciate it as always, and I hope to see you next time. As always, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Bye-bye.